Hi everyone. Today I'm going to take a look at the lore of the Death Korp of Krieg. This is the fourth video I've done in a series of videos, and I've covered also the Catechins, Mordians and Valhallans, and links to those videos are in the description below. My channel covers everything Astra Militarum with video released every week, so please subscribe for more. Of all the Astra Militarum regiments, none captured just how grim and dark the 40th millennium is than these guys. Mentally conditioned from birth, they view themselves as a mere grain of sand that contributes to the avalanche that is the will of the God Emperor. Referring to themselves not as I, but as the trooper, they are completely dehumanized. They have no names, but simply identity numbers, and they wear their gas mask absolutely everywhere, meaning forming social bonds with other troopers is impossible. They can absorb casualties that would make the most grisly of commissars wince, and they possess a fatalistic approach to life. Now, how on earth does mankind produce a collection of people so willing to die without question? This of course started on their homeworld of Krieg. Krieg was once a prosperous hive world until the year 453.M40, when the ruling autocrat declared Krieg independent of the Imperium. The loyalists were quickly beaten back until the infamous Colonel Jurton discovered a cache of ancient weaponry and deployed the nuclear payload on the planet of Krieg. This plunged the planet into a nuclear winter and wiped out the majority of the population. It did, however, even the odds against the heretics, and after a 500-year-long civil war, Krieg was eventually returned to the Emperor's light. Colonel Jurton's actions were questionable given they completely destroyed the planet, but he is revered still today, so much so that tiny fragments of his body are kept by different Krieg regiments and are treasured with religious regard. This complete disregard for human life continues in the Krieg way of war today. Their planet contributes 50 million men a year to the war effort, and given the world is a nuclear death world, this is all they can actually contribute anyway. The shaping of a Krieg soldier starts at birth, with their upbringing educating that the future actions of themselves on the battlefield are all part of the Emperor's overall plan. They are taught that their officers are representatives of the God Emperor, and to follow their orders is to follow the orders of the Emperor himself. Their training is horrendously brutal, with weakness beaten out of recruits, and violence been completely normalised. They are expected to show no sympathy for each other, often engaging in hand-to-hand combat exercises that guarantees that some of the students will break bones or tear ligaments. Their early life is dominated by military training, which simply means all they know how to do is fight as a soldier. Now, pausing here, the upbringing in the Death Korp of Krieg needs focus. I'm no psychologist, but my understanding is that a person's childhood is typically the most influential stage of their life. Something that modern childhoods are mostly free of today is open violence and suffering. And the closest thing most of us come to death on a day-to-day basis is the meat we buy at the supermarket. This freedom of violence is in stark contrast to what the frontline soldiers are intended to do. I never saw active combat during my time in the army, but the psychological impact on returned veterans is very well documented. Now think what it's like for the troops of Krieg. Your entire existence is based around violence. You think of yourself as nothing more than a tiny piece in an overall plan, where to die is as natural as it is to live. You have no family, being born in a birthing vat. You wear a gas mask all day so no one can see your face, and you don't even have a name. If there were ever to be a more perfect recruit for warfare, then this is it. So conceptualizing this state of mind is understandably very challenging in the modern world, although we only have to look back 60 years for some examples. World War II saw troops from several nations take on the attitude of guaranteed death in exchange for hopeful military success. Towards the end of the war, the pilots of the Japanese Air Force willingly performed suicide missions, happily plunging their aircraft into American warships. The last letters of some of these pilots to their family have been documented, with them explaining their willingness to die for the Emperor of Japan. All sounds very familiar, doesn't it? So once finished their training, often at the age of only 14 or 15, Krieg troops graduate after first experiencing live combat on their home world. They fight on the surface of the planet, which is still a nuclear wasteland, and hence the use of their gas masks. They fight mock battles between themselves using live ammunition, and the eventual survivors are bundled into transport ships to be shipped off to actively deploy Krieg regiments to replace their dead comrades. And what awaits these new troops is a life of guaranteed constant warfare. The Death Korp of Krieg's reputation is so renowned that regiments are constantly in action, moving from one campaign to the next. Their near zero desertion rate, coupled with the fact that for a Krieg trooper to disobey an order is inconceivable, means they can be relied upon to pursue any campaign without rest. Imperial commissars are nearly pointless in Krieg regiments, instead having to act as liaison officers to confuse planetary officials who are offended by a Krieg officer's complete disregard for anything but the mission. They are often also the ones trying to stop Krieg officers sending thousands of troops to the death on seemingly pointless endeavours. There is, however, a somewhat method to the madness of the tactics of the Death Korp of Krieg, or at least in their minds anyway. The officers calculate the potential success of a mission, campaign or war, often down to the minute. They celebrate any additional minutes of survival, viewing this as a deprivation of the enemy's resources. So this is where the Krieg attitude to war further develops. They see war as a grind, where they can contribute by reducing their enemy's resources, simply by forcing them to expend more ammunition, troops, time or focus on countless ranks of Krieg troops. This also probably helps them to justify losing thousands of troops at a time. Krieg officers would continue a campaign as long as there is a small margin of success, being content that every minute that they're engaged with the enemy is depriving them of resource. And this grind is further supplemented by their reliance on artillery and mortar pieces. Basilisks, heavy mortars, quad launchers and Medusas will continuously bombard the enemy position until there's simply nothing left for them to shelter in. Once beautiful cities would be flattened, with the artillery slowly creeping forward to encircle the enemy in a wall of fire and shrapnel. But while they revel in the fact that they will grind down the enemy with Krieg bodies, they take a more measured approach to their equipment and weapons. Dead guardsmen are quickly stripped of anything of value by platoon watchmasters, who will redistribute their equipment and weapon to other troopers. The blood of mortally wounded troops may also be transfused, with the attitude that the dying guardsman no longer needs it. And special weapon troopers will throw away their weapon right before their death, to ensure that it isn't damaged by the oncoming shot, hence ensuring it can be used by somebody after. And believe it or not, within Krieg regiments there are veteran platoons called grenadiers. Those that survive long enough are either promoted into leadership positions or join these veteran platoons. These guys are typically no more than 19 years old, which reflects just how high mortality is in the Death Korp. Further to this, the grenadiers are deployed on the most dangerous of assignments, with the designation suicidal being accurate, even by Krieg standards. These troops are, however, better armed and protected than their junior colleagues, but of course this is offset by the horrendous odds that are stacked against them. Also of note are the Death Riders. Whilst there's a wide array of armoured vehicles to use in the 40th millennium, these guys are paying homage to their ancient ancestors from the pre-Age of Terror, riding gene-enhanced steeds that are literally champing at the bit to trample their foe with their savage hoofs. The Death Riders are equipped with explosive-tipped hunting lances, and images of men in eerie black gas masks, wearing black grey coats and helmets vaulting over trench lines comes to mind. So finally, to close, the Death Korp of Krieg have a deserved reputation for a suicidal approach to warfare. The attitude that each of their lives is a mere resource to be expended is foreign to other Astra Militarum regiments. It is, however, important here to think of things from the opinion of the Krieg troops themselves. As I said before, if their entire upbringing and existence has been centered around that to die is the same as to live, then this suicidal approach is completely normal to them. Remember that a person's existence is defined by the parameters that they exist in. How someone views their life is dictated by this. So while we may look at the Krieg way of life and think they are a suicidal bunch of violence-driven fanatics, they see themselves as normally as you or I would ourselves. Don't forget, of course, that the word Krieg in German means war. So they are the Death Korp of War, a military organisation that's entire existence is centered around guaranteed death on the battlefields of the 40th millennium. So there you have it, the Death Korp of Krieg. A fantastic story of an Astra Militarum Legion where to die on the battlefield is no different than to live day to day. Hope you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. And as I said at the start, I've covered other Astra Militarum Legions, and links to those videos are in the description below. If you'd like to support me in my channel, you can do so by a like, comment or subscribe, or even supporting me on Patreon, and the link's also below as well. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.